Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 31 from book 5 of Caesar's de Bello Gallico. So remember, at this point in the Gallic Wars, we're dealing with the revolt rather of Ambiorix, and it really focuses on this fort that we have highlighted here in red. This is the fort in the land of the Eburones, right, their territory. This is where Sabinus and Cotta are, and at this point in the narrative, we've seen that Ambiorix already attacked this fort in a minor little skirmish. He gave his big speech about, the Romans should leave, and he tells them that all of Gaul is revolting against them, the Germans are coming, all these things. Sabinus and Cotta have been arguing with the other commanders as to what they should do, and here we're going to see the conclusion to all of that as they finally make a decision on what they want to do in terms of leaving the fort. Okay. So before we dive too far into it, like I always tell you in these videos, the first thing you probably want to do is pre-read the story, get any vocab under control that you need. You can find a bunch of stuff. There's a lot out there. De Bello Gallico is so famous. A lot of people have made Quizlets and vocab sets and things like that. Just find one that seems useful to you or make your own, whatever it is. But you always want to start there. That way you at least have a shot of reading this, because it's really hard to understand and read Latin if you just don't know what the words mean. So start there. The other thing I'd recommend you do is reading the story aloud so you can lock it into your long-term memory, right? So read it aloud, work on your pronunciation, your speaking, have someone, maybe a classmate or someone, read it back to you so you can work on your listening skills. These are always great things to have. You never want to shut them off and just translate in your head. That's not the best way to learn any language. It's definitely not the best way to learn Latin either. So always bring the language to life and read it. And like I said, it'll help you just with remembering a lot of what's going on too in terms of Latin. And you'd be surprised how much it helps. The other thing that I do, or the last thing I would suggest that you do, is use the read and reread method. So read through this once, right? Start to finish, write down any problem areas that you might have, whether it's vocab or grammar or whatever it is, write them down on a list. When you're done reading this chapter, go over your list and try to figure out where you went wrong. If it's vocab, it's really easy, right? That's a very easy way, very easy thing to look up, rather. You can just figure out what the words are and go back to the story. If it's grammar, it might be a little trickier. You might want a commentary or something like that to help you through. But one way or another, try to figure out where you're going wrong and then repeat the process. And when you repeat it 2, 3, 4 times, whatever it is, as many times as you need to, you're locking it, like I said, into that long-term memory, which is really what you're after, not just short translations. And it'll also help you to really understand what's going on, okay? And by the time you're done, you're trying to go to a point where you can read through this entire chapter and you don't have anything written down. That's how you know you're ready to move on. Okay, so if you haven't done that yet, pause the video. Otherwise, let's go through it together and we'll translate it as you go. And again, your translation does not need to be in lockstep with mine. Mine is never perfect, but it should be a guidepost to help kind of get you through. Okay, so the chapter starts like this. You have consurgetur ex concilio. Okay, so here we have one of those impersonals again. So you can translate this as they rise from the council, they get up from the council. So again, the literal translation, or the way it really looks, is something like, it is arisen from the council. I think it's kind of how you do it. But that impersonal is something that you want to just translate more actively. So a lot of, commentaries will tell you that an easier way to do it is just to say they rise from the council, right? So the council is over, basically. Then you have comprehendur untrumque et orant ne sua dissensione et pertinacia rem in summum periculum deducant. ... right? We're in the middle of a longer sentence here. So here you have they grab or they seize, comprehended, both, utrum, right? The utrumque, right? And they detain both. So here I always, and I think I've seen other commentaries talk about this, that it's probably talking about the centurions, right? So the leaders, the other leaders in the council are stopping Sabinus and Cotta, which kind of makes sense when you read the rest of it, that this is someone else talking, not Sabinus and Cotta, right? Because they grab them and they beg, orant, right? They beg them that, right? And you're about to have this, this indirect command, this indirect statement here, because they're begging, and it's negated by ne, right? That they don't do something. So they beg that they don't, on account of sua dissensione, on account of their dissension and their pertinacia, which sometimes you can translate as like stubbornness, right? That they don't, or they might not deducant, right, lead the situation, the rem, into the highest danger, right, the greatest danger. So in other words, they're saying, don't lead us into this horrible danger because of your own dissension and your own stubbornness, right? So it kind of makes sense that these would be the leaders begging them not to do this. And now we finish the rest of the sentence. You have faculum esse rem, seu maniant, seu proficiscantor, si modo unum omne sentiant ac probent, contra in dissensione nullum se salutem perspicere. So again, they are saying that, right, or begging them that the facilem esse rem, right, that the situation, the rem, the issue, or the situation was easy, right? Facilem esse, right? You're just continuing that indirect statement here, right? So they're saying, and you can almost add and, right? And they're begging or saying that the situation was easy, right? Whether they stay, seumaneant, or they depart, right? Proficiscantor. So it's saying whether or not we stay or we depart, right? The situation should be easy or pretty easy, the decision. Si modo, right? If only. It almost, I think I've seen in some translations, it's almost like provided that, right? But they're saying if only they all, omnes sentiant, they all feel or agree and approve, probent, on unum, one thing. So in other words, if they can all be on the same page, right, this shouldn't be such a difficult decision. They're saying whether or not we stay or depart, let's all get together and feel and approve the exact same thing, unum, right? Then you have contra, right, on the other hand, right, they're saying in dissensione, right? So in dissension, they're saying that they say, is your subject of the indirect statement here, right, that they perceive or kind of feel nullam salutam, no safety in dissension. So in other words, they're saying to these leaders, we have to make a decision. We have to be in agreement, whether we stay, whether we go, we all have to be unum, right, on one mind, because we don't feel safe in dissension and disagreement. We're all going to get killed, right, is what they're saying. Like, if you don't agree, this is going to be a very bad situation for us. Then you go on to the next line. You have res disputatione ad medium noctem perducator. Okay, so the race, the affair, the debate is kind of what it means, was prolonged, perducator, right? It was prolonged by the dispute, disputatione, right? So by that disagreement, the whole affair was prolonged ad medium noctem, to the middle of the night, right? So it just keeps dragging out. Okay, so Sabinus and Cotta are not agreeing. They get up to leave, and I always have this image of, they're about to leave and storm off, and the centurion saying, no, don't leave, right? We need to agree. And they just keep going into the middle of the night. And then you have tandem, finally, right? So tandem dat cotta per motus manus. So finally, Cotta, having been moved or convinced, per motus, he dat manus, he gave his hands. But it almost kind of has the image of throwing up his hands, fine, I give up, right? So in other words, he's surrendering. He gives his hands. You can almost see him with his hands out or throwing them in the air, fine, whatever, I give up, right? So remember, Cotta is the one who wanted to stay in the fort. Sabinus is the one who says he wants to leave. And Caesar tells us here, superat sententia Sabini, right? The opinion, the sententia of Sabinus wins, superat, right? Overcomes or conquers everyone, okay? So again, here you can see that Caesar is once again putting the blame on his commanders. They couldn't figure it out, and he's naming them specifically, saying this is, your plan. So he's naming Sabinus, saying this is your plan, and it won out. But he's also kind of blaming Cotta here by saying he surrenders, he gave hands. To me, anyway, it has this sort of negative connotation of he gave up. Right? Cotta should have stayed there. He knew it was right, and he gave up anyway. So there is also a little bit of blame thrown at Cotta here. But at the end of the day, they decide that they're going to leave. So then you have the next line. You have pronuntiator prima luce ituros, right? Ituros, rather. So it is announced, pronuntiator, right, at first light, prima luce. So at first light, they're arguing all through the night, remember. And at first light, it's announced that, okay? Now here, you have ituros. It's really ituros esse. And there probably should be a missing eos in there as well. It was announced that there's sort of a missing or implied eos, they would leave. Ituros esse is that future infinitive, okay? That they would go. So now it's announced, and now everyone knows it's time to go, and they have to pack up the camp, okay? Then we continue, and you have consumitor, vigilis reliqua pars noctis, cum sua quisque miles circumspicaret, quid secum portare posset, quid ex instrumento hibanorum relinquere cogeretur. So Again, here with consumitor, you have that impersonal again, right? So something is kind of consumed. Or actually, no, sorry, this is not the impersonal. It's going with reliqua pars, rather. So you're saying the remaining part, noctis, of the night is consumed or is spent. There we go. Vigilis, right? With the watches or in watches. Those are the night watches, right? If you're being vigilant. So in other words, it's saying that they're up during the night, right? They're staying up is kind of the idea, and they're doing these night watches to make sure that everything's okay and they can pack up the camp. Okay, so then you have cum sua. So the rest of the night was spent, and you have when each each soldier quisque miles, right? Each soldier circum spiceret was inspecting sua, his own, meaning his own stuff, right? His own things, right? And you're going to see that what they're looking at are the equipment, their gear, their stuff, right? So every soldier is spending this night by trying to get everything ready. Okay, and then you start with these quids, right? So the quid here, it's basically like an indirect question, right? So he's looking at his stuff, and they're kind of thinking to themselves, "Quid secum portare posset?" Right? What was he able to carry or to bring, portare, to take with him? And what ex instrumento, what from the equipment hibernorum of the winter quarters was he forced, cogeretur, to leave behind, relinquere, right? So that's where you have this indirect question, because you don't have the question actually listed, but they are thinking these in their mind. So again, the rest of the night is spent with these night watches, right? All the soldiers are trying to figure out what they're going to do, right? And they're asking themselves, what can I bring? What do I have to leave behind? They're inspecting all their gear, and they're just trying to figure out how they're going to get out of the camp. And basically get on the move as quickly as possible. Okay, and you can see this sort of parallelism here, where you have the quid, right? What you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And again, the idea of being forced to leave behind does kind of give you a visual of these soldiers potentially not wanting to leave, or being a little rushed, right? Because there is a timing element here; they have to get out of the fort quickly. Okay. Then you have omnia ex cogitantur, quare nec sine periculo maneatur et languore militum et vigilis periculum ogeatur. Okay, so everything ex cogitantur, everything was thought out. You could say was kind of debated, right, in their mind. So everything was all thought out. Okay, and you have quare, for what reason or why is kind of what's going on here, right? For what reason they would remain maneator, not without danger, right? So nec sine periculo. So like for what reason they would stay with danger is kind of what it is, right? And you have the augeator, right? Periculum augeator. So danger would increase. So you can almost say like what reason they would stay not without danger, and danger would increase, right? Augeator, both, you have the et, right? So you can almost do like both from the languore militum, from the weariness of the soldiers, and from the vigilis, right? The night watches. So it's almost like they're sitting here and they're thinking to themselves, how much more dangerous is this about to become, because we just spent the night not being able to sleep and having these different night watches, and everyone is now tired. So again, it's all these sort of spinning thoughts, swirling through the minds of the soldiers, right? Everything's kind of being thought out, right? Why are we doing this? What reason are we doing this? What's the danger? Is it going to be more dangerous because we're leaving and we're tired, right? These are things that the Romans are trying to figure out as they get out of the camp. And then you end with this. You have prima luce, sic ex castris proficiscontur, ut quibus esset persuasum non ab hoste, sed ab homine amicissimo ambiorige consilium datum, longissimo agmine maximisque impedimentis. Okay, so again, we have prima luce, at first light, they depart, proficiscontur, right? They depart from the camp thus. And a lot of commentators will point out that the thus is kind of interesting. Because it's not just that they departed, the men are tired, right? They're tired, they've been up all night, they're thinking. So it's not the best sort of situation for the Romans to be leaving the camp in. They're not really in a good place. They just were debating all night, the officers, everyone's tired, they're trying to get this stuff out, but they do depart from the camp, okay? And this next part is a little bit tricky. So they depart as, you can almost say like as men who, or as those who, right? Persuasum esset, had been persuaded, right? So here you could say almost like that they had been persuaded that a concilium datum esse, right? That a plan was given. Okay, so it's talking about the soldiers are leaving as people whom, right, or to whom had been persuaded that a plan was given. So I think that's kind of the easiest way to translate that. And it's a little bit tricky as you kind of work your way through. But so they were persuaded that a plan was given not by an enemy, non ab hoste, so not by an enemy, but by a homine amicissimo Ambiorix, but by the most friendly man, Ambiorix, right? So in other words, the Romans are departing camp here, and they're feeling like that they have a plan that came from a friend. So that's what it's saying. It's not from an enemy, right? They didn't feel like that a plan was being given, and that they were persuaded by an enemy, but by a really friendly man, the most friendly man, their ally Ambiorix. So in other words, they're leaving as if they had been persuaded by Ambiorix, which is true, right? He convinced them that this is the right thing to do, and they're kind of trusting him. Okay. Then you get sort of the pair of ablative absolutes here. You have longissimo agmine maximus impedimentis, right? So you can add that being to it. So you can say like they departed being in a agmine longissimo, in a very long column. That's sort of the marching column, and with great baggage, right? With being with, or kind of bogged down with, maximis impedimentis, right? With great baggage. So that's going back to the proficiscuntur at the beginning of the line. They departed. So not only did they depart having been persuaded that this plan is coming from a friend and not an enemy, but they're departing in a very long column and with a lot of stuff. And this is going to be the problem, right? A Roman army on the march like this is very susceptible to attack, particularly when you think you're marching with friends and not enemies. And obviously they're about to be marching with enemies. This is Ambiorix's whole trick. Okay. So again, that last part is a little bit tricky, right? You have to kind of work your way through that grammar, imply the essay with datum, right? Just to try to make it all work. But again, you could also kind of translate that line like, they marched as if men who had been persuaded by Ambiorix is kind of sort of another way to do it, not as an enemy, but as a friend. It's kind of a little bit, I think I've seen both in commentaries on how you can handle Ambiorix. But again, the idea is that they leave camp and they're feeling, not necessarily good because they're tired, but they feel like they have a solid plan and that Ambiorix is going to help them. Okay. So just some things to think about. This chapter, in terms of the narrative, is pretty straightforward, but it is kind of interesting. When you look at it, they finally make an agreement, Sabinus and Cotta, but it's not really an agreement, right? It's not as if they agreed on both things. It's just Cotta gives up, right? He's just warned, and he's like, fine, whatever, right? You take it. Sabinus and Cotta are threatening to leave. The officers have to kind of save the day. To me, all of this shows that Sabinus and Cotta are not acting the way that leaders should, right? They're not agreeing, they're arguing, they're not on the same page, they're storming off from each other. They're having to be kind of brought back and calmed down. The men are begging them to make a decision. It just does not come off as a great look to these two men who are supposed to be leaders, right? And Caesar makes a point of naming them as bad leaders in this, okay? And again, Cotta giving up is kind of an interesting one. Should he have done this is the question I would ask you, right? If you're a leader and you feel like everyone is going to get killed and you're very strong in your conviction, the question should be, should you have given up, right? I don't know what exactly you could have done, but that idea of throwing his hands up or giving his hands, I think is Caesar telling us like he kind of just gives in, which is not the right idea, okay? The other part of this chapter that's interesting is a lot of it focuses on the soldiers, right? So there's a lot of time spent by Caesar really painting the picture of the conflicted soldiers. So they're the ones bearing the brunt of Sabinus and Cotta's argument. So they're over there, Sabinus and Cotta, and the officers are arguing in the tent, particularly Sabinus and Cotta. The officers have to calm them down. The men have to get up in the middle of the night and pack, right? Because it took so long to make this decision. They're tired. They don't exactly know what